In 2021, the state of Texas recorded 177 earthquakes. In 2022, that number began climbing. In 2023, it reached 2,359. In 2024, it reached 9,238. In the first 30 days of 2026, monitoring networks recorded 736 earthquakes in the Texas and New Mexico portion of the Permian Basin alone. That is more than 5,100% growth in recorded seismicity over 3 years. Not a single one of those earthquakes was produced by a fault that had been accumulating tectonic stress for centuries. They were caused by a practice that is legal, widely performed, economically essential to the United States energy economy, and provably capable of generating earthquakes in regions that had essentially no seismic history. It is called produced water disposal. And the Permian Basin of West Texas is injecting approximately 4 million barrels of it back into the ground every day. The Permian Basin spans roughly 8,500 square miles of West Texas and southeastern New Mexico. It is the largest oil-producing region in the United States, responsible for approximately 40% of American crude output. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing beginning around 2009 initiated the shale boom that made the U.S. the world's largest crude oil producer. And it brought something most coverage of that boom does not mention: water, produced water, enormous quantities of it. When oil or gas is extracted from a geological formation, the process brings up far more than hydrocarbons. It brings up naturally occurring water that has been trapped in the rock alongside the oil for millions of years. This produced water is saline, many times saltier than the ocean, and contains arsenic, heavy metals, and naturally occurring radioactive elements concentrated over geological timescales. In the Permian's older formations, the ratio can reach 10 barrels of water for every barrel of oil. Across the entire basin, the cumulative produced water injected underground since 2009 exceeds 45 billion barrels, approximately 2 trillion gallons of fluid pumped into the subsurface of West Texas. That fluid has to go somewhere. Surface discharge is prohibited. The standard disposal method is underground injection, pumping produced water into deep porous formations below the productive layers. In the Permian Basin, operators inject into formations 1 to 3 kilometers below the surface. And at those depths, in those volumes, it has been doing something the industry did not anticipate, and regulators have been struggling to address: increasing the pore pressure on pre-existing fault planes in the rock. Pore pressure is the pressure exerted by fluid in the pores and fractures of underground rock. Normally, faults are held in place by friction and the weight of rock above, a balance that keeps them locked. When fluid is injected at high pressure and volume, that pore pressure increases, acting against the normal stress that was keeping the fault in place. Below a critical threshold, faults that had been geologically stable for hundreds of thousands of years begin to slip. Each slip a produced earthquake, where no natural earthquake would have existed. Bill Ellsworth, who co-directs the Stanford Center for Induced and Triggered Seismicity and has studied this phenomenon for more than a decade, stated the conclusion plainly: as long as wastewater disposal continues, these faults are likely to continue to slip and make the occasional earthquake. The Permian Basin was not the first place in the United States to learn this lesson at scale. Oklahoma learned it first. From 2012 through 2016, the state of Oklahoma experienced one of the most dramatic induced seismicity events in U.S. history. Wastewater injection from conventional oil production, which had been ongoing for decades but was dramatically increased in volume, activated fault systems throughout the state. The seismicity rate in Oklahoma increased to the point where it temporarily became the most seismically active state in the contiguous U.S., surpassing California. In September 2016, a magnitude 5.8 earthquake struck near Pawnee, Oklahoma, the largest earthquake in the state's recorded history and one of the largest induced earthquakes ever documented in the United States. It damaged historic buildings in Pawnee. It was felt across multiple states. What happened after Pawnee was the proof of concept that regulators and scientists needed. Oklahoma's Corporation Commission mandated significant reductions in wastewater injection volumes near areas of high seismicity. Operators complied. Oklahoma's seismicity rates fell substantially from their peak. This established a finding replicated in Kansas, Colorado, and now Texas. The induced seismicity problem can be reduced if injection rates are reduced. More injection means more earthquakes. Less injection means fewer earthquakes. Texas demonstrated this with the 2020 Mentone earthquake. The M5.0 event near Mentone in Reeves County was the largest clearly induced Texas earthquake at that time. It damaged homes and was felt across the Permian Basin. It convinced the Texas Railroad Commission to implement injection volume limits in the Delaware Basin. The seismicity rate dropped. Then, as injection pressure continued, it resumed. By 2024, Texas had recorded 9,238 seismic events, and the number has been rising every year. The concern that scientists express is not primarily about the earthquakes that have already occurred. A M5.0 or M5.4 earthquake in a sparsely populated oil field is disruptive and economically damaging, but it is survivable. The concern is about the ceiling, the maximum magnitude that the geological conditions in the Delaware Basin's basement-rooted fault system can produce. The Permian Basin has two distinct types of induced seismicity. Shallow, strata-bound earthquakes occur when fluid injection within the producing formations activates faults in those same formations. These tend to be small, rarely exceeding magnitude 3. The second type, and the one that produces the larger events, occurs when deep injection, at depths greater than 1.5 kilometers, increases pore pressure on the ancient basement rock below the sedimentary sequence. These basement-rooted faults can produce significantly larger earthquakes. The AAPG's December 2024 analysis of Permian Basin-induced seismicity documented basement-rooted faults generating events up to local magnitude 5.4. Oklahoma reached magnitude 5.8 on a similar basement fault. The question that researchers are actively investigating is whether the Delaware Basin contains fault geometries capable of reaching or exceeding that magnitude, and whether the current cumulative injection volumes have loaded any of those faults toward a larger threshold. The communities at the center of this seismicity are not abstract populations on a risk map. Pecos, Texas, a city of approximately 12,000 people, sits at the heart of the most seismically active zone in the Delaware Basin. Mentone, with a population of roughly 20 people, has become one of the most seismically active towns per capita in the United States. Its residents' homes have sustained damage from events they did not experience before 2014. Odessa, population 120,000, and Midland, population 145,000, have both recorded induced earthquakes. The companies at the center of the operational picture are not anonymous. ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, and Pioneer Natural Resources, now absorbed into ExxonMobil, are among the largest operators in the Permian Basin. Their wastewater disposal operations are the primary driver of the induced seismicity, and their own infrastructure is at measurable risk from the earthquakes that disposal creates. Bill Ellsworth has noted that even small amounts of fault slip can lead to shearing of wells, a costly operational failure. The companies creating the earthquakes are also the companies most likely to be damaged by them. The Texas Railroad Commission faces a structural challenge in this situation. It is the regulator for the oil and gas industry, and it is simultaneously the regulator for induced seismicity. It has shown that it can implement injection volume limits that reduce seismicity. Mentone demonstrated this. It has also shown that the industry's pressure to maintain production volumes makes those limits difficult to sustain. The seismicity rate that peaked dropped when limits were applied, and then rose again to 9,238 in 2024, is a record of that tension. There are three numbers that define the current status of the induced seismicity situation in the Permian Basin. The first is the annual seismicity count. In 2021, 177. In 2024, 9,238. The 30-day February 2026 figure of 736 events suggests the annual trajectory continues upward. The second is the magnitude ceiling. The largest clearly induced Texas earthquake has reached ML 5.4 on a basement-rooted fault. Oklahoma reached M5.8 on a similar structure. Whether the Delaware Basin contains faults capable of reaching or exceeding that magnitude, and whether current cumulative injection loads have pushed any of those faults toward their rupture threshold, is the scientific question on which the risk assessment fundamentally depends. The third is the Texas Railroad Commission's response threshold. When Mentone produced M5.0, the Commission acted. Seismicity dropped, then rose again. The question is, at what point does the aggregate seismicity record, 9,238 events in 1 year trending upward, trigger a response that exceeds what was implemented after a single M5.0 event in 2020? The science says the problem can be managed through injection volume controls. The economic incentive says those controls will be resisted. The record of the past 5 years says that without sustained regulatory pressure, the seismicity will keep rising. Texas produced those 9,238 earthquakes. They did not arrive from a fault that had been loading since the Pleistocene. They arrived from wells that have been operating for years, in an oil field that has been producing record volumes under a regulatory framework that demonstrated it can work and has struggled to sustain it. The number will be higher next year unless something changes. Whether something changes depends on choices, not geology. Subscribe to stay ahead of what's coming.